welcome to this segment of Arts Talk. I'm Sherri Burr, and we're going to focus this segment on the New Mexico film industry and its incentives. And we are fortunate to have two special guests, a proponent of the industry, Witt, who's the executive director of the Motion Picture Association of New Mexico, and Paul Gessing, who's the president of the Rio Grande Foundation. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, so Eric, why don't we start with you and just have you describe the incentives and the economic impact that the incentives are having on the state of New Mexico.
Well, New Mexico offers a pretty good incentive package for films that are being produced here. 25% refundable tax credit, what people call a rebate, commonly call a rebate for every qualified dollar of production spend in the state.
Okay.
We also have the other main components are we offer a 0% interest loan in return for a back-end participation on a film that's got to be 100% guaranteed, up to $15 million. And then other things like free use of certain state buildings and properties for location shooting and stuff like that. The economic impact of the industry has been since really 2003 when the state really went after cranking this business up.
Okay, but it started under the Republican governor Gary Johnson, right?
The first incentives, that's exactly right, were passed in 2001 and 2 under the Johnson administration. That is correct.
Okay.
Since that time, it's been about $1.3 billion in direct spend in the state for an economic impact. The state uses a multiplier of 3 for this business for an economic impact of close to $4 billion.
Okay. And are you using a multiplier of 3 times the entire amount that's been spent, or are you dividing part of the amount and estimating? Are you basing it on film budgets, or are you basing it on the actual amount that was spent in New Mexico?
The actual amount that was spent in New Mexico.
Okay. All right. All right. So, Paul, let's have you tell us a little bit about the Rio Grande Foundation and why you've gotten involved in this debate.
Well, we're a fiscal policy analysis organization. We're a nonprofit. We don't really have a dog in the fight per se, aside from the fact that we're working to advance policies of free markets and limited government. You could say that's pro-business, but pro-business means pro-all business, not just some businesses. And we are trying to help policymakers in Santa Fe solve the budget deficit that is being faced and dealt with there right now.
Okay.
So our concern with this particular program involves that it directly spends taxpayer money for the benefit of one particular industry. And I don't disagree with any of the data or anything that Eric just mentioned. In fact, I would cite that last year, the New Mexico Film Office found, their analysis was that there was $600 million of economic impact. That's $200 million of direct spend and $600 of economic impact, more or less. And that's on spending in terms of the tax, the credit, et cetera, but actual spending from the state, about $66 million.
Okay.
And according to our analysis...
So that's like a 1 to 10, like the state spent $1 for every $10 of economic impact.
But you have to look at the actual way the data comes together. And we tax, as a state, economic activity of all sorts at about 5% rate. That's personal income, top rate's 4.9. Gross receipts at a statewide level is about 5% as well. So if you tax $600 million of economic activity at 5%, you're only coming up with $30 million in taxes. So we're spending $65 million or $66 million for collections of $30 million. Those numbers don't work, and that doesn't add up to a benefit for the state economy, because we have to focus on tax money, not economic activity. They're two very different numbers. And if you focus on the tax money, you're actually, you're either raising taxes to pay for it, you're shortchanging other programs, as some on the left would say, but you're actually spending money that could be spent, whether it's on education, Medicaid, or any other government program. So we have to focus on the fact that this is actual government spending, and that government spending is derived from taxes that are collected at a limited, small rate, 5% or so, around the state.
Okay. Eric, what's your response to that?
Well, my response to that is and Paul and I agree in the sense that we both approach this from the financially, fiscally conservative point of view. Our belief is that the program more than pays for itself. You have these these competing studies that are out there. Some were done in New Mexico, some were done in other states.
Yeah, the two that were done in New Mexico, one said that New Mexico was getting 14 cents for every dollar it spends on the industry, and the other that I think you commissioned when you were with the state said that New Mexico was receiving $1.50 for every dollar it spends.
Correct.
Okay.
The first one was done at the Arrowhead Center down at New Mexico State University. Now, to the author's credit of that study, they themselves said, look, we're not considering the entire impact of the industry. We're looking at a very narrowly focused segment of the business.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that was rolled out by some in the political arena as being an accurate study, largely my belief to counter what came later, which was the Ernst & Young study that you were talking about, which was a more comprehensive, field-based, empirical data, study. Nonetheless, this controversy exists right now, and there's confusion in the mind of the public. So, what we're asking them to do right now, and invite the participation of Paul and his organization and other people who are experiencing this, is take your time to look at what the actual impact of this business is in New Mexico. Don't rely on studies from other states. They're one cited now from Massachusetts. They have a different program structure. They have a different tax structure. They have a different crew base, resident crew base, and business infrastructure, all of which is critical in maximizing the capture of local jobs and money into the economy. So take your time, look at it thoroughly. First, do no harm to the program until you know what it is that you're messing around with.
Okay, all right. What do you think about that? Does that make sense to not do any harm to the program until you're absolutely clear about the impact of it?
Well, we have a major budget deficit right now, and the program's not on the chopping block for elimination. That bill has already been killed in Santa Fe.
But you proposed elimination, didn't you?
Yeah, I
in
think
your op-ed piece in the Journal.
I think what we need in New Mexico, the way to develop our economy, is have low, flat, fair, and simple taxes and regulations. That does not involve taking money from anyone else in the state and giving it to one particular industry. And that's what's happening with this program. It's the way it works.
Are you proposing eliminating all the incentives, including the oil and gas incentives?
Well, you're twisting the way this actually works.
I'm just asking, are you proposing that?
But
There's no twist here.
No, but where we start from, assuming that we all have engaged in economic activity and we make money that belongs to ourselves, that oil and gas industry and any other industry in the state creates wealth, and it's either taxed or not taxed.
Okay.
We can argue whether that's the best way to do things or not, but it's either taxed or not taxed. This is not taxed. This is actual money that's taken from other people and other economic activity around the state. So it's really apples to oranges that we're dealing with. There are many other incentive programs. I think there's something like over 100 different tax incentives, everything from grocery sales are not taxed in New Mexico to certain kinds of investment and doctor's fees, all these kinds of things. But that's totally different. That is money left uncollected that the state could otherwise collect versus money that's taxed in and then paid out. And they're very different things. We need to make sure that there's a bright line between them.
Okay. All right. What's your response?
We just say, look, let's look at the industry. There are $1.3 billion a year the state spends on what they call its tax budget between various incentives or credits, or like Paul was saying, they're in the form of like incentives like we have for the film industry. There are exemptions from property tax for agricultural land, mining, oil and gas, auto sales are taxed differently. Newspapers don't have a tax on them. Other industries are directly paid cash, in the form of like what we call our JTIP program, which is a worker training program where the state pays up to 50% of a worker's salary in certain businesses while they're being trained. So you put all this stuff together, and it's about $1.3 billion a year that the state spends. Of that, less than 5% goes to the film and television program. So our position on all this stuff is, and somewhat agreeing with Paul on this, is that treat all of these the same. Look at when the state is facing a budget deficit like it is. Let's look at the whole thing. You're leaving 95% of your expenditures on the table completely unexamined in terms of reporting and what the return on investment is and such. Our other point is, and this is where Paul and I will disagree, we do believe that we make more money than we spend between state and local government income on the taxes generated by the economic activity on this business. I still believe strongly in the Ernst & Young figures, or something much closer to that, much closer to $1.50 coming back for every dollar spent. So when you hear the folks in Santa Fe, some folks in Santa Fe say, well, we're spending, $66 million in output on this program. Yeah, but you're making 90 back. And so when they say we're going to save 25, okay, they want to cut the program down, and that's the figure being thrown out there right now. They want to save $25 million in the budget. All right, you're saving 25, but you're losing, 40 or whatever. So that's where we come up with again, first do no harm, get your head around what it is that this business actually does for the state, and then let's see, let's see how we go forward.
Now, there's been a lot of attack of the Ernst & Young study, including there was a representative who wrote an op-ed and criticized Ernst & Young and said that there have been problems in other studies. Did you review that? That they had proposed, and that was concerned that whether Ernst & Young was the appropriate entity to do such a study, because there have been problems with other studies. What's your response to that?
Well, Ernst & Young was chosen in an open contract bid process. When that study was commissioned, I was with the previous administration. We asked the Legislative Finance Committee to jointly sponsor that study with us, so it did not become a he said, she said, who owns it, who's this. They declined. And they instead commissioned the Arrowhead study. Okay. So that's where the two different things came from. Now, in terms of criticism of Ernst & Young specifically, that representative was referring to their being named in a lawsuit regarding some activities on Wall Street. But everybody, as you know, as a lawyer, everybody gets named in every lawsuit, particularly the stuff that was going on there. There have been no specific accusations. And it was an entirely different division of Ernst & Young, which is a global company. They're in over 100 countries around the world. The folks who did our study here aren't even in the same state as the folks were that the representative cited. So, by his logic, because the former Speaker of the House was just convicted in Texas and he's a Republican, this representative ought to be in jail too. So it just doesn't make any sense. Okay, gotcha. All right. So, Paul, how do you respond to that? If the state is indeed making $90 million, it's been 60, but it's making 90, shouldn't that indicate that this is a program that we need to keep? We need to keep New Mexicans employed in this industry.
Well, I've never seen that 90 million figure, and I'm not saying that it's not somewhere in one of these studies, but the Ernst & Young study, they had a direct financial incentive to come up with numbers that were favorable to the people who were hiring them. And I don't know.
What are you saying was that direct financial incentive?
Well, they were being paid by the film office to
wasn't the Arrowhead study, weren't they also paid?
They're a university. They're much more insulated from that kind of thing. I'm glad nationwide.
You think that university folks are much more insulated.
I would say much more, not completely. We're all, in real world here, but there's dozens of studies nationwide, many of which have taken a direct look at New Mexico. And I would cite the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, a liberal organization out of Washington, D.C., that said the revenue generated by economic activity induced by film subsidies falls short of the subsidies' direct costs. It's right out of the stuff that we've been saying. So there's liberals and conservatives agreeing on this when they take an objective look. Now, if they have an incentive one way or the other, overwhelmingly they've come to the conclusion that whoever was paying them to get the study wanted. Now, I'm all for studying more. I think we need more transparency in the program. We need to see all of the data up on the table and bring that out so that we know what we're working on. It's just simple that we want to have openness in this kind of program. And I agree with incentives all over the board should be analyzed as well. But this one's in particular extra special, needs to be looked at very carefully. And
why is this one extra special?
Because it's direct expenditure. Direct expenditure is such an important thing. I mean, it's one thing to not collect tax on an economic activity. It's another thing to actually collect taxes and then spend that money on something specific. And so we need to really look at what we're doing in the context of the other states, because 40 other states are doing this. And so we need to compare and contrast what's going on.
and I'm all for that. You know, we're all for studying transparency. You know, the more people look at this thing, the more they get a grip on what it actually is doing for the state. You know, but this is where, you know, with all due respect to my friend Paul, you get into this rabbit hole of madness, what I call it, when you start saying, oh, it's this study, it's that study, it's this, it's that. You know, I would counter what he just said by saying, well, yeah, it's a direct expenditure, but only after, because it's a rebate, it's only given after the companies have spent all their money here. They've just, you know, you paid out $66 million, but they just dumped another, you know, $300 million into your economy, you know, before they got anything back. So, you know, like I said, it can get crazy when you start doing the he said, she said thing.
Okay. So given that some states have a defined pot of money to pay for these rebates, like Alabama uses a tax on out-of-state corporations, South Carolina uses a percent of their lodging tax, how comfortable would you feel if New Mexico had a defined revenue stream to pay for the film incentives?
Well, that's been proposed before. You know, I think in fact you editorialized about some kind of lodger's tax or some kind of tax associated with tourism, with people coming into the states.
Right, a film tourism fee.
Film tourism fee, something like that. Those have been proposed in other states. You know, if there are ways to fund this program, you know, however it gets funded is one thing.
Oh, okay. So as the executive director of the Motion Picture Association of New Mexico, your entity would be comfortable supporting a film tourism fee where all the money would be used, or most of the money would be used to fund the film incentives.
Well, you'd have to look at that. You know, that particular program, though, that particular fee that you're talking about has been proposed by the tourism department before to fund the general tourism budget, because we spend a lot less than surrounding states on our annual tourism, a lot less than Arizona, Colorado, Texas, and they have been looking for a dedicated revenue stream to try to get their thing up and running. But you know,
so what's happened with their individual proposals? Have they actually been put forth to the legislature?
They have in prior years, and they have failed to pass.
Failed to pass. Yes. Okay. And what about the Rio Grande Foundation? How would you feel if there was a film tourism fee that would support the film industry incentives, and that would take it out of the general budget, which is something that you're concerned about?
Well, I'm actually of two minds on this one, and that might surprise you. On one hand, I think it's terrible tax policy, because I think you're going to be taxing one specific group for the benefit of another specific group. But you could argue, as you have, that the primary or among the primary beneficiaries of this are the tourism industry. And I think it depends on how you define, you know, is it just hotels? Is it broader than that? Is it focused on restaurants? I would be most willing to consider something that's narrowly focused on specific tourism entities that think that they benefit from this. Now, I'm not saying that the Rio Grande Foundation is going to jump on board with this, but I would be interested, and that would crystallize and frame the debate, because if the film industry, if the hotel industry, the tourism industry feels that it's getting the kinds of economic impact from the Ernst & Young study that's reported about tourism and how much that plays into the benefits of the film industry, then they may be fine with that kind of tax plan. If they are not feeling that that data is accurate, they will fight it tooth and nail in Santa Fe and oppose it. And I'm not familiar with the previous battles that have been fought over this in New Mexico or other states. It would be surprising if that kind of thing took off. To me, just knowing that an industry that's already in economic distress, the tourism industry, is going to be willing to take an extra tax. But I would be interested in seeing that debate unfold if that's something that the film office and the film industry propose.
Okay. All right.
There you go. There's your opening. Why don't you introduce the bill?
Personally introduce the bill. Wow. Law professors have done that before, so it is possible.
Yes, they do.
Yes. And I think it's pretty clear that the hotel industry and the rental car industry has benefited from the film industry, because those are two sources that the film industry employs when they come here. So why wouldn't they not support it when there's a direct benefit to come to them?
Well, you're talking about ultimately taking, $66 million out of one side of their business that's going to be taxed on it, And
Well, it's not necessarily it's not necessarily coming out of their bottom line, so it's an additional fee. For example, when I went to Phoenix to rent a car, I was charged a county stadium fee on my rental car. Well, I paid that on top of what I paid to the rental car agency.
I don't like those fees either. I mean, publicly financed stadiums, a lot of this stuff I think is completely unnecessary. I'm just saying that when you focus the actual dollar amount, $66 million or whatever final number, because then you'd actually have to come up with a defined amount of money that the industry is going to get, because that's one of the interesting things about this is that it's uncapped. And so legislators go into Santa Fe each year not knowing how much money they have to set aside for it. So if you do set up a defined revenue source, you will have to say, well, is it going to be $80 million? Is it going to be all the money in the fund, and it's going to go up and down based on rental car fees and hotel fees, et cetera? I'm not in favor of all these policies. Don't get me wrong. I'm just going to reiterate once more time that it's not good tax policy. And people do respond to them. Ultimately, if they go high enough, people will not rent a car. They'll take a mass transit. They'll do something else. They may not come to that particular location. It just depends on a lot of different factors. And I would just say that it would be interesting to see the reaction of those two industries. If they jump on board and tax themselves, I'm not going to be out there pounding the pavement to stop them from taxing themselves.
Okay, gotcha.
Can I just make one point
Sure.
on the general philosophy behind, tax policy is used and has been used throughout the history of humankind to promote or discourage certain activity. It's a policy tool that is employed, by political leaders, by the public through their elected officials, in terms of encouraging things that they want to see happen. One of the reasons that the state focused on the film industry is not because we like making movies, but because of its unique economic footprint across the entire economy. Very few, if any, other industries spend as much money as quickly across as broad a range of businesses in the general economy as does film. So this was something that we went after for that very reason. It fits our strengths and weaknesses here in New Mexico. It's portable, you can move it around, you can help different communities. There are policy reasons behind why this business was singled out. And it's not, as Paul said, it's not the only one by any stretch of imagination. There's a bill up in front of the House Tax and Revenue, I think it's actually in front of the Business and Industry Committee now, sponsored by Tax and Revenue Chairman Ed Sandoval, that reviews all of these different tax incentives that are granted to industries across the board, and requires them to report periodically back to the state on what's working, what's not. Everything from renewable energy to what you mentioned, they're adding in the extractive industries now. These are all things that should be looked at, and we encourage the government to look at to get the best benefit for its citizens. But that's one reason, that's the primary reason why this business was chosen, and particularly in the economy that we just went through. You mentioned hotels, rental cars. Businesses up and down Main Street, New Mexico, supply a given film. On, for example, Wildfire, which was a TV series that was shot here, ABC series, employed over 300 local vendors. I mean, everything from office supplies to babysitting to off-duty cops and firemen, looking to make extra money. It's a huge impact across the entire general economy. So, and this is where Paul and I may disagree philosophically. Is a good tax policy, is a bad tax policy? There is no doubt that this is an active approach to encouraging a particular industry in the state, but for all the reasons that I just mentioned.
Okay. We have an audience, so let's ask our audience if they have questions of these two esteemed gentlemen. Jeff Hanna?
Yes, it's kind of like a two-part question, but prior to since the implementation of the tax incentives, do we have data that shows that there has been a spike in tourism for New Mexico? And the second part of it is that it seems to me that before